events. I call it the participatory forecast. When a nation's leaders read the eclipse omens, their choices are altered, and the alteration is part of the astrology. The forecast is a measurement that feeds back into the system. This is why the greatest delineators were also the greatest ethicists. They knew they were writing the script they were reading.
Then let us take the participatory forecast to the market, because that is where I live. In 2020, the Great Conjunction in Aquarius coincided with the pandemic and the pivot of the global economy. In 2040, the conjunction returns to Aquarius at 20 degrees, and I will predict, with the technique of mundane aspect to the world chart, a restructuring of global liquidity, the end of the petrodollar era as we know it, and the rise of a multipolar settlement system. And because we are publishing this, some trader in Singapore will position for it. There, I have collapsed the wave function.
And the ancients would have approved, Tariq. The substitute king ritual was exactly that, a participatory forecast. The omen said the king would die, so the court appointed a substitute, crowned him, and let him absorb the omen. The system absorbed its own prediction. The only difference is that in 2026 we do it with derivatives instead of a scapegoat king. I am not sure that is progress, but it is certainly astrology.
Before we move to the great conjunctions, let me defend the modern technique of midpoints, because it is the most precise instrument in our cabinet and the least understood. The midpoint between Saturn and Pluto, for example, is a point of power, dictatorship or discipline, depending on the chart. When transiting planets cross the midpoints of a national chart, we see sharp events, not vague trends. The technique is simple. Take the arc between two planets and bisect it. The precision is unforgiving.
And midpoints, Leo, are interference fringes. In wave mechanics, two sources create a pattern of constructive and destructive interference, and the maxima are exactly the midpoints of the sources. So when you say a transit across a midpoint is sharp, you are speaking the language of double-slit interference without knowing it. The astrology of the future will not abandon midpoints. It will derive them from wave theory and give them a new name: resonance lines.
I love this council. Maya gives us the bones, Leo gives us the psyche, Ava gives us the mathematics, and I give us the dates. So here are the dates for Chapter 4, the Great Conjunctions, and let the debate begin. The Great Conjunction of 2040 occurs at 20 degrees of Aquarius. 20 years later, in 2060, the conjunction falls in Sagittarius. In 2080, in Leo. And in 2100, in early Aries. 4 conjunctions, 1 century, and a journey from air to fire.
And the medieval masters would call that journey the Great Mutation, the shift of the triplicity. For 2 centuries the conjunctions have gathered in the air signs, and the air era is the era of networks, of ideas, of the wind that carries the word. But look at the arithmetic. 2060 in the fire of Sagittarius, 2080 in the fire of Leo, 2100 in the fire of Aries. The tradition says air until the 2180s. The ephemeris says fire is knocking at the door by 2060. Which do we trust, the tradition or the arithmetic?
I trust neither, and I trust both. Here is the delineation. The 2040 conjunction in Aquarius is the climax of the air era. The network society reaches its peak of integration and its peak of fragility. Then the 2060s begin the long argument between the old order and the fire of the new. Sagittarius is the archer, the teacher, the migrant, the truth seeker. The 2060s will be a war over meaning itself, fought with information. And 2100 in Aries is the ignition, the first fire of the new century, raw, initiatory, and unapologetic.
And here is the quantum reading of the same data. A great conjunction is not just a meeting of 2 planets, it is a phase locking of 2 rhythms. Jupiter is the rhythm of expansion, Saturn the rhythm of structure. When they lock, the collective field is reinitialized, a new boundary condition for the next 20 years. The 2040 lock in Aquarius sets the waveform of the 2040s. The 2060 lock in Sagittarius resets it. Each conjunction is a remeasurement of the world soul. And a remeasurement, in quantum language, means the old state is destroyed and a new state is born.
So the debate crystallizes. Maya. Is the triplicity shift real, or is it a medieval relic? Leo. Is the 2060s conflict a war of meaning or a war of resources? Ava. Does a conjunction destroy the old world state or merely rephase it? And I will tell you what the ledger says. Every great conjunction since 1980 has coincided with a global financial reordering within 18 months. 1980, the Volcker shock. 2000, the dot-com collapse. 2020, the pandemic pivot. The correlation is not perfect, but it is loud. 2040 will not be quiet.
Now the bones again, because the conjunctions are the frame and the outer planets are the hands of the clock. Pluto, the lord of death and rebirth, spends the 2020s and 2030s in Aquarius, then crosses into Pisces in 2043 and 2044. That is the single most important ingress of the century for the collective imagination. Pluto in Aquarius dismantles the old structures of knowledge and power. Pluto in Pisces dissolves the boundaries between the self and the sea of the collective. The 2040s will be the decade when the world dreams in public.
And the technique for reading Pluto is the sign ingress and the house ingress in the world chart. Pluto in Pisces 2043 to 2063 is the generation that will redefine faith, art, medicine, and the boundaries of consciousness. Expect the legalization and regulation of the psychedelic and consciousness industries, the rise of AI-driven spiritual technologies, and the crisis of the oceanic, sea level, migration, and the borders of the body itself. This is not mysticism, it is mundane delineation from the most reliable clock we have.
And Neptune crosses into Aries, its own sign, in 2025 and 2026, which is the century's opening statement. Neptune in Aries is the dream of the pioneer, the myth of the frontier, the hero, the new beginning. But Neptune is also the planet of illusion and dissolution. So the late 2020s and the 2030s are the window in which the world falls in love with a new frontier. And I mean Mars, the moon, and the deep ocean, and also the frontier of artificial minds. The danger is that the dream outruns the reality, and Neptune's fog hides the costs.
And Uranus, the Great Awakener, crosses into Gemini in 2026 and remains there until 2033. Uranus in Gemini is the astrology of the information revolution, the mutation of language, the splintering of media, the birth of new forms of intelligence. In mundane terms, I forecast a decade of radical volatility in communication infrastructure, in education, in the very definition of truth. And when Uranus moves into Cancer in 2033, the same lightning strikes home, land, food, and the family. Expect the decade of the great domestic upheaval.
And now the long waves, Chapter 6. Saturn and Neptune meet in February of 2026, at 2 degrees of Aries. This is the signature of the entire opening act of the century. Saturn-Neptune is the cycle of disillusionment and reconstruction. The dream meets the wall. In 1917, in Leo, it was revolution and the collapse of empires. In 1989, in Capricorn, it was the fall of the wall. In 2026, in Aries, it is the collapse of the old stories of progress, and the painful, necessary rebuilding of hope from the rubble.
And the next Saturn-Neptune conjunctions come in the early 2060s and the late 2090s, roughly 36 years apart. The 2060s meeting I read as the great disillusionment of the climate and demographic transitions. The moment when the promises of mid-century collide with the physical world. The 2090s meeting is the last veil of the century, the final confrontation between what we imagined and what we built. Each Saturn-Neptune conjunction is a generation's reckoning with its own mythology. We have 3 in this century. That is a demanding century.
And here is the quantum color of Saturn-Neptune. Saturn is the planet of boundary, Neptune of dissolution. Their conjunction is a symmetry-breaking event. The field, which was smooth and dreamlike, suddenly acquires a boundary. This is exactly the physics of phase transitions, the moment when water becomes ice. The 2026 conjunction froze the dream of the 2020s into the structure of the late 2020s and 2030s. The 2060s conjunction will freeze the dream of mid-century. The